Hi, and welcome to HMP's HR podcast. I'm here with Cara, and I'm excited to talk about, I think, performance management. But I also have to apologize because the dogs are in the background playing today for some strange reason in my office. So they decided to join us.
I love that. We always want to make room for our fur babies and
Yes,
all household members in this remote working environment that is so common these days. So
it's so true. They're usually pretty good and quiet, but today they've decided that they wanted to be listened to on the podcast, I guess.
it makes everybody human, and I really appreciate that, especially when I graduated college. I was like, people with certain titles, oh, they're so fancy, they're so wonderful. And I think there's something beautiful about the humanization of this remote work environment.
It's
But
true. I have to agree with you. For a long time, I thought it was not okay to
no,
ever have noise or pictures or anything in the background when you're working. Um, and now I'm like, no, it makes us all real. Like, I'm totally okay as long as they behave themselves. But we'll see.
well, and with that, I think also this kind of can tie into some performance and something that an old executive said, which I really love, but as one of his management philosophies, and this kind of goes into our performance conversation, he would say, I am fair, but I am not equal. So what that means is this was before a remote work environment was common, but if someone wanted to work from home, or someone wanted to have different work hours, or someone wanted to um, I don't know, just have something a little bit different with their working environment. He said, meritocracy. If I can trust you and you can do your work well, then yes, you can do that. But that doesn't mean that your colleague who has the same title as you will get that. I don't have the same
Yeah.
level of trust. But I think this is where performance comes into play because without a good performance structure and documentation, it could easily be taken into bias or discrimination or having some sort of substance to those fair but not
So
equals.
true.
So,
Yeah, it totally is true. And I think one of the things that all leaders need to understand is that, and I agree with that sentence, right? Not everyone's going to get the same exact benefit or opportunities in a work environment. And it has everything to do with trust level, it has everything to do with
mhm,
skill level, and business need. Like those are
yeah,
three things you just have to take into consideration. And it has nothing to do with not being fair or being biased or discriminating or anything like that. It
mhm,
really, truly doesn't. And I think as an employee, you have to sometimes listen to why you
yeah.
did or didn't get an opportunity and understand that in there is a reason, right? And you probably are part of the reason that that choice was made.
Well, and actually, let's jump into kind of, I'm thinking kind of formal performance management. We're into, it's Q4 time. Everyone's doing their annual reviews. So I have a couple of questions for you just to think about thought processes behind best practices and what you
Ooh.
think is a good performance review cycle. The first question
Okay.
I have is exactly this. And my husband and I were just talking about this. I think sometimes all of us like to think, especially if there is a numerical rating component, that we are at least a three or above. I think a self-evaluation will rarely be below a meets expectations. So what happens if me, your employee, I think I am knocking it out of the park, I am exceeding expectations, I am a four or a five, and in your perspective, you're like, her dog is always on the call barking, she's not paying attention, she's throwing a ball to that dog, or I'm unprofessional, late, all of these things, but I think I'm doing great. How do we address that misalignment between a self review and a manager perspective?
Yeah, and it happens so much.
A
It's
lot.
so funny. I was just talking to an owner of a company earlier, and he's like, "How does this employee not know that we're about ready to terminate them? How is this? What are we doing wrong?" Well, sometimes you're not doing anything wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people are not really self-aware. And I'm finding that more and more in society, self-awareness has went out the door. And
Oh,
so people absolutely see themselves in these rose-colored glasses in environments where they shouldn't. But there's multiple reasons. Employers are partially responsible because they have to have good communication all year long. But to talk about what you're talking about, I'm a big believer that you do an employee self-review first and you
yes.
collect that data before you start yours. Because you need to understand how they view themselves, because that'll help you in how you communicate the reality of what your expectations are and whether they're being met or not. And if you wait and then you look at them at the same time together, that misalignment becomes an awkward conversation. You're not
Yeah.
sure how to address it in that moment. And so always, always, always do a self-review, hand that in so that the manager has a chance to look at that at the same time they're doing the review so that they can be prepared for that conversation because the conversation is going to be difficult
Yeah.
when you do that. But a huge part of that has everything to do with you as a leader going, okay, what have I not communicated? How have we gotten to this point where you see yourself as this amazing, stellar employee and you're showing up for half the meetings? You're coming in late all the time, you're whatever it is, right? How have we gotten here to where you have a totally different view?
Yeah.
Most of the time, it's because me as a manager has not told you you're not meeting expectations. We wait until this once a year kind of concept, and then we like blow it up, right? Okay, you did this wrong, and you're not doing this, and you're great at this, etc. And so the problem is that when that's the only time you're communicating your employee, of course they have no idea they're not doing a good
Yeah.
job because it's our job as leaders to tell our employees as the situations come up. No different than think of it in a relationship like you were just talking about you and your husband were having a conversation. So let's say that he chews with his mouth open every single freaking day and it just drives you nuts. And I'm not saying Dorian does. I think Dorian's amazing, but I'm using it as an example. So he chews with his mouth open all the time and it is the most annoying thing in the whole world, but you never tell him. Like in a marriage, would we do that? Oh, heck no. Are you kidding? I'm the first one to go, John, shut your mouth when you're talking, like, or shut your mouth when you're eating. Like, I can't stand watching your food come out of it. Whatever it is, right? We are more willing in a personal relationship to have that kind of conversation. Not always, but more willing to than we are in a work environment. But we spend more time in a work environment with those people
Yeah.
and so we're setting them up for failure. And so I really have a hard time waiting until a performance review for those numbers to misalign. And if it happens that way, then I really need to look at myself as a leader and say, okay, what did I not communicate? How did I not set expectations? How did I not have that conversation before it got to this point to say, hey, Cara, I really love it when you're on time for the meetings because you have this great smiling face and you're so engaging when you're there and it's super important. And lately it seems like you're coming in late. Is there something we need to do to adjust the meetings? Don't make it all about the employee not doing a good job. Find
Yeah.
out why it's happening. But you shouldn't ever have that kind of a misalignment. It's okay to have like a 3 to 4 or a 2 to a 3, like a one-on-one kind of misalignment, but not like major jumps where you think they're a 2 and they think they're a 5.
Yes, that would be problematic. But I do love this theme of yours that, when we talked about, being a trusted partner, it never starts at the incident. When we talked about
Yep.
PR crises or HR relationships, whatever it may be, the theme
No.
that I love is that from day one, it's creating those habits and creating that open style of communication so that when the big event happens, there's already the level of trust, the level of communication. Like there's no surprises because we've already addressed it, and that makes it so much easier. I think so often we are cautious with maybe contentious conversation, but it's not contentious if the expectation has been set. And to your point, you come from curiosity of, hey, is there a reason why that you've been late recently? Instead of, you've been late, why are you not here? It was more, what's been going on? How can I be? And that was kind of, I was thinking about that seagull leadership component of
Oh, yeah.
inviting employees into the conversation if you see something early. It doesn't necessarily have to be a performance conversation, it can just be a check in. Okay.
Yeah.
So now that we also have the numbers, because I think sometimes we have quantitative and qualitative components in reviews, for rate for the rating scale, what do you like to see? Do you like numbers? Do you like even or odd? Do you like qualitative? And if so, what is the scale that you think is the most effective at making performance reviews truthful and accurate?
Great question. I don't care whether it's quantitative or qualitative. And here's why. Let me explain. You can give me a number system and I can use it and I will be happy with it. You can give me a meets expectation, above expectation
Mhm.
improvement, and I'm happy with it too because it's not about either of those. It's about the quality of communication after that
Yes.
that's more important and valuable, right? So if I give you a 3 and I say, Cara, you're doing a great job. You're meeting the expectations that are there. I'm finding that you are really good at this, this, and this, and I continue to see you grow in this, this, and this. Whether I put a 3 to that or meets expectations to that doesn't matter. It's about the information I provide you afterwards, because that's how you're going to grow and how you're going to know how you're doing. It's not the number system, because everyone values numbers differently. So
Hmm.
to me, I am always going to be hard on myself. I will give myself a 2 or a 3, possibly a 4. I never ever give myself a 5, even though I know I do 5 work, because and I'm not saying I walk on water. I'm just saying there are certain things I know I'm really, really good at, right? All of us are. But I will never give myself that. So numbers don't matter. Same with an exceeds expectations or, walks on water. I still would never give myself that, even though I know my work quality could be that. It's
Yeah.
all about the communication component. So everyone's different. You might be the opposite. You might be one of those people who's like, I think I need to give myself a higher score so my supervisor sees that I'm doing a good job,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So to me, it does not matter whether it's a number system or a word system. It's all about the documentation afterwards to communicate how you're really doing and how you're meeting or exceeding expectations or falling short too.
Yeah. And I think also with that, having not just the after conversation, but also the expectation setting beforehand. Because I remember the same organization where this executive had this fair but not equal, there was a very clearly defined, here is what a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mean. 5 is a unicorn. That means they're ready for a promotion. That means they are embodying everything that they should be doing and more. And then they also said twos are acceptable because it means maybe you are new to your role. Maybe you are a new hire. Maybe you haven't been in this role for 6 months. And I appreciated that there was like a hey, just because you're a 2 does not mean that you're not performing. It means you're still learning. And that kind of change in perspective, I think, allowed folks to have a lot more grace for themselves if they were rating and kind of having that calibration. And with that, what do you think about large company calibrations? Because every manager also rates employees different, and some might be much more generous, whereas some might be very strict. Do you think calibration sessions are necessary?
So you started to explain what
Oh,
I was gonna say,
sorry.
and this is perfect. No, it's like we're both on the same page at the same time, because I was gonna say it wouldn't matter which system you're using if you're
Okay.
not doing a really good job of explaining what that means to all of the
Yeah.
managers in the organization so that people are aligned with it, because there's nothing worse.
Yeah.
We're in HR, so we've seen it. There's nothing worse than knowing that you have one manager who's going to give all of his people 4s and 5s because he wants everybody to like him, and he thinks that that's the best way to do it, where you're going to have someone else who's the opposite mindset that says, you know what, if I give them all 2s, they'll have to strive twice as hard because they understand that there's more to
Mm,
grow and do, right? It's no different in even a ABC kind of thing at school, right? So when you're getting your grades, you have hard instructors and you have an easy instructors. Same thing with leaders. But the problem is the employees, right? The problem is when you've got a employee who's talking to an employee in a different team and they're like, "Hey man, I just finished my performance review and I thought I was doing great and I ended up with all these 2s on my performance review. It was
yeah.
awful. I felt like I didn't do a good job." And you got the other employee who he knows slacks half the time. He's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, really, man? My manager, he said I was doing awesome. I got all 4s and 5s." Right? Now you have this animosity between employees, which shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
And it happens because our leaders are not all aligned in how they're going to use those scoring systems. And I think it's HR's job 100% of the time to really truly make sure that that is clear and that there is a clear delineation on how we want employees to be scored. And like you said a minute ago, I loved what you said when you said a 2 could be new to the position. A 2 could be learning and growing in your first
Mhm.
6 months. A 2 does not mean that you aren't capable of doing the job. It means you have growth opportunity,
Yeah.
right? So making sure that those are clear expectations for leaders and how they use that system, but then also give a good definition of what that is for the
Yeah.
employee's sake, but also for the leader's sake. I think it makes all the difference in the world. Otherwise, you're going to end up with situations like that. No different than I hate that bell curve crap.
I
Like,
was gonna ask that one too.
oh my God, that is probably one of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to any type of performance review. Do not tell me I have to score my people off of each other. it
Yeah.
isn't going to happen. Like, I don't need to have a one. I don't need to have a five. Like, don't tell me this. I need to score people off of themselves, off the expectations of
I
the
love that.
job and their skills and capabilities. That has nothing to do with anyone else, right? And it's not fair to be judged off of other people. Even if you
Yeah.
have the same job title, you may bring something totally uniquely different to the position, and your skill set may not be the same for that job as someone else's, but you have something that brought you into that role or something that I've made
Mm.
sure was a part of why you were chosen that's uniquely different from somewhere else. It doesn't mean you're doing a better or worse job. It's just different.
I love that. Do not have a favorite child. I think that's incredible. Look at the
No, but I am
individual
my
in their
parents' favorite
role.
child, just so you know.
Oh,
So,
it varies between my sister and myself. I feel like we are always alternating. But with that as well, though, like, I guess where does the oversight, or is there any level of oversight outside of the expectation setting? If I may, I have a story, an
oh,
old organization, and now a different one than the one I referred or was referencing earlier. But this, a manager wanted us to actually read every single review because there was a lack of trust at the time with the management um, ratings. They were all very kind, nice folks, which tend to inflate. So we had an entire organization of fours and above. So we were looking at the reviews, and the manager wrote inside the review, even though we've had repeated conversations to whether it was like punctuality or quality of work or whatever it might have been, it still hasn't been met. So we'd love to see that change in the future and gave them a five. And so we were like, okay, clearly now,
what?
like you actually took like the quote from a two essentially. After repeated conversations, this has not been fixed. Like it was seriously something out of a corrective action plan. And they still had a four or a five. And in those scenarios,
What did
that's
you
where my
do?
mind. So, in this particular exercise, we went through every employee and a manager review. We highlighted the discrepancies and then had a calibration meeting with that manager. It was a pretty intense, like extensive project, but it was because their scores were directly related. And again, this is where it gets numerical to their perform or their compensation increases.
Compensation. Yeah.
And we wanted to make sure that we were being prudent in how who received what percentage increase was actually representative of their work. Um, so we had to have some conversations of, okay, you said this, that does not align with the number. Your qualitative description is not in line with the quantitative number. Let's talk. I was not in those conversations, but I did the research for who needed to have a conversation. But that was one of those scenarios. Okay, so I'm presenting that to you, manager. I happen to be going through my reviews. I see this misalignment between this manager. How would you have that conversation? And, you know, hopefully the conversation hasn't yet been had with the employee, but what if it has? What do we do then?
Wow. So first of all, I am a big advocate for HR seeing all reviews before they go out.
I like that.
All reviews. My reasoning for that is, especially in today's society where litigation is the favorite word of employees when they're unhappy, it's very easy to put something into a review that can be taken the wrong way. If you're
Mm,
not used to writing reviews, if that's not your leadership style, and so the problem then becomes how do you rectify it after it's happened, right? And why wouldn't you want to fix it before it happens? And then it's also easier to coach leaders in how to have those hard conversations. I see that you're giving this employee a one or a two. Let's talk about how you're going to communicate that to the employee in the right way so that it helps them grow. Or if it's a one, does this mean this isn't the right person anymore and we should be having a different type of conversation, right? You learn a lot about how people are doing in an organization from an HR perspective when you get a chance to do that. And you have a chance to correct issues before they happen in meetings. I also am a big believer in seeing employees self reviews because in my career, I've seen self reviews that would indicate there is bullying or discrimination going on in a
mm,
department. And I wouldn't have known that otherwise because the employees aren't going to come and tell you these things sometimes because of fear of retaliation, whatever. But when you see it in how it's written into an employee's review, it's easier to go, whoa, we have an issue here. right? So I'm a big believer HR should be involved in that process from start to finish, to help support, coach, review potential issues or problems that could come up, those kinds of things. So that aside, now we look at what your scenario. First of all, if I would have saw that and they had a 2 comment but a 5 score,
Yeah.
I would have pushed back immediately. One, whenever you do reviews, one of the things I always coach leaders on is if you give anyone a 1 or a 5, you better have a very good explanation for it inside of the document. And I need to buy into that explanation before you give it to an employee. I don't have to understand it, but I have to buy into it. What I mean by that is the explanation meets the criteria of what you just gave them, right? So that you can explain that out to the employee. In the case where this one didn't meet it, I would have sat down with the manager individually and I would have said, hey, can you explain why the score is this and the comments are this? Because it can't happen. Like you're gonna have to change one or the other kind of thing. And then I would help them get to the point where they could see that.
Hmm.
The other thing is I am not a big advocate for tying compensation to performance review scores
Oh,
for that very reason.
interesting. Okay.
And that's changed in my career, but for a long time, I one should equal the other, and that's how you're going to make sure that you're
Yeah.
given the right kind of increases. The problem is exactly what you said. That manager was giving fours because he wanted to make sure that he had money in his budget to give for performance or for compensation increases.
Hmm.
So it's not accurate. So when you tie the two together, there's not as much accuracy.
Yeah.
And every leader will tell you that, even myself. Like, I know that I want the most budget money I'm going to get to be able to compensate my team appropriately. And so I know that scores that I'm giving are going to help dictate how much money I get, right? I'm not going to purposely do it, but my brain knows that. And
Okay.
so it's very easy as a leader to want to make sure that you are easier on your review scores for the compensation and then maybe tougher on just how you communicate that,
Okay.
but it doesn't align. And the reason is because as soon as an employee in turn ends up getting terminated and says, hey, but I want all my performance reviews, I've had this happen one too many times.
Oh
And you
no.
pull out the performance reviews and they all have fours across them, and you just terminated them for not being a good fit. Explain how you're going to talk to that in court. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't match up. And then you do get that. You get the lawyer who goes, I need to understand why you have all of these high scores, but you're saying you terminated them for, not being a good performer. It doesn't align. So you're going to end up in a lawsuit or paying out or
Yeah.
severance or whatever because of that. You have to be accurate in that data, especially with the new laws that have changed where employees have access to absolutely everything in their
Yes.
files,
Hmm.
right? So you can't have special notes. You can't have special files. You're going to be able to produce all of that when an employee leaves. And if they leave disgruntled, you better hope that the information you provided them with verbally when you let them go matches up with what you've actually got in their employee file, which is what I'm dealing with a client of ours right now is
Hmm.
that they want to let go of the employee, but there's no documentation. I mean, I've heard with all of the coaching that I've done, I've heard the issues that this employee has, but they didn't write them down anywhere. So this employee is seeming to be oblivious to the fact that they're not doing a good job,
Hmm.
and there's no documentation otherwise. I mean, it's an at will state, so you can let them go, but it's not going to hold up. Like it's going to be an
Oh
issue.
God.
This employee potentially is going to be like, show me where you told me I wasn't doing a good job. Show me where I didn't meet the criteria for what you were asking for.
Oh man, I feel like our next podcast, it needs to be documentation because that also just sparked lots of scenarios. And y'all,
Yes.
documentation doesn't sound like a lot of fun, but it's so helpful. But I mean, that also extends the question of even in performance reviews, when to extend maybe grace or growth versus when it's actually a performance conversation. When does it tip from growth, mistakes, bad week, sick, whatever it might be, into often does not meet or sometimes does not meet, like how we define that. So it'll be curious to see with documentation and how we know, like, well, write that down for us.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. And it's a pet peeve of mine when you don't have enough documentation. Most HR people are that way. So it'll be a really passionate topic for us to talk about. But to answer your question a short answer to your question, attitude.
Hmm.
You just asked, how do you know when a performance issue needs to be this or this?
Yeah.
whether it's actually something we're going to coach and learn and grow from, or whether it's something that's more PIP related. Attitude. And what I mean by that is, does this person seem to want to do the best job possible? Does this person seem to want to grow and increase their capabilities and skills? Does this person come with a positive attitude to work? That will a lot of times dictate how I feel about which side of the coin to flip, right?
Okay.
And it's a lot of, intuition by the manager and trust by the manager on that working relationship when you get to that point of, tipping one direction or the other.
So for composition of a performance review, do you like having both um, kind of that, again, that quantitative goal of you were supposed to meet X% of customer satisfaction or complete this project by this date, as well as pairing it with the attitude and the values? Do you like having both, or what would you like to see in a performance evaluation?
I like to see both.
Both. Okay.
What about you?
I like both too. However, I always get a little antsy with the attitude and the culture pieces because if the conversations haven't been had in advance, for you to all of a sudden tell me, hey, you're not a good team player, I'm like, I need it. You better show me the receipts. Like, where have I not been a good team player? Because it can almost feel like an attack on a character or
Yeah.
values of yourself. So, how, especially if one has a bad attitude, how do we bring that up? And again, I sense having the repeated conversations is helpful, but let's say it's done annual review. I am not a good team player. Maybe I just have a negative attitude for things and don't have a lot of grit. As we know, current events around this world are it's usually bad news, and maybe it
Yeah.
affects my workplace. I have a friend who had a young employee who I think we talked about this example, but would take off for every headline and then would
Yeah.
come in and complain and then say, why can I not have a promotion? So, can you chat with me quickly about this last scenario of that it's the attitude? They're doing their job, but there's a lack of attendance because of their lack of grit and a bad attitude.
It's the very worst. I say be careful when you hire first.
Hire well. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because of that very reason. When someone does something wrong and there's a performance issue, a lack of skill set, a violation of policy, super easy to have those conversations and to decide what to do, right? Because it's black and white.
Yeah.
But we deal with people and nothing's ever that black and white. Everything's in that gray area. And attitude and teamwork and culture are the freaking hardest, the very
Yes.
hardest to actually evaluate somebody on. Because who's to say what a positive attitude is versus a optimistic, pessimistic, or just neutral attitude?
Hmm.
Like everyone's totally different. And you have to be careful when it impacts their work, when it impacts
Good
their
point.
attendance, when it impacts the team. That's when you have to have that conversation,
I agree.
right? But you need to turn it around and make it about work, not
Okay.
about them, right? So it's not like, hey, Cara, you really seem to be very negative in, in your communication and you seem very unhappy all the time, right? I would never say that. Instead, I would say, hey, Cara, when you use the kind of language you do in meetings, you're impacting your team negatively. When you're talking about how everything is wrong all the time and you're not bringing ideas or solutions to the table, that is a sign that your team feels that you're not a part of that group or that
Mm,
solution solving area. So can you see how if you bring those things, and I'm not saying don't bring because that's your personalities to bring up the things that aren't going well, but can you see how just leaving it there and not providing solutions or
solution.
ideas is actually not helping the team grow? Can you see how if you changed that up a little bit and added this to what you're already saying,
Yeah.
you could help build that team? So you make it about the business and you make it about the work. Um, Unless it really is
Oh,
just they come in and they complain all the time and they talk negatively about people all the time. And then it's a different conversation. Then it's one of those that you say, hey, you are negatively talking about other employees. And that's not the culture we have here. If you have issues with employees, our request is that you direct them to the employee and you two have a really good conversation about things that may or may not be working well. If you need HR support, let me know. But you can't just go around talking negatively about employees at work. It's not a culture we have here, and it's not something we'll accept, right? So you have to manage it based on what you think the employee can handle or hear,
Yeah.
but try not to make it about the employee as much as about the business and the work that they're doing.
Oh my gosh, what a gift good managers are, because not only are you helping people
You
do
know?
work and get money, that's a therapy session. Let me take you for who you are, but refine those rough edges and kind of rechannel. Because, I tend to, I'm always like, oh, that's a great idea. That sounds amazing. I'm very much like, that's
The
a jump
cheerleader
in.
kind, yeah.
But I don't, but because of that, I sometimes don't see, we need the black hatters as well, because they're the
We
ones that
do.
can see the risks, the pitfalls, maybe the negative. Not everyone's going to be a cheerleader, so they need to know
Yeah.
how might some other folks respond. And I love that that is a scenario of, hey, I love that you have a different perspective, or hey, your perspective brings value to the team. However, shift it ever so slightly so that it helps moves us forward versus making us seem like you're just not on board with the direction we're
Yeah.
going. And okay, love that so much. Well, again, here's my cheerleader. Oh, I need to, I gotta
There you
work on
go
that.
again.
I know. Here I go.
Don't I love it? It's good.
Well, I feel like that is a wonderful way to end it. Thinking of our wonderful leaders, managers who
I agree.
think about performance as not just a checking a box situation, but how can it truly impact this individual to not only be a better professional, but maybe even a better human. And
And help
ultimately,
them grow. Yeah.
that's all we want, Like I love that. There's a lot of care for a human as well as the organization of how to move it forward, and just to do it fairly and well. So, do you have any parting best practices tips or thoughts or a story before we close out?
I would say a tip would always be performance reviews every year. Don't skip, don't forget, and don't think it doesn't have value to the employee. Those are things that leaders and organizations in general who choose not to do it, I think they are missing the mark. Employees truly do want to know how they're doing.
They do.
It matters to them, good or bad. And when you miss that component, you are impacting your culture, you're impacting their growth, you're impacting the bottom line of your company because people aren't going to get better if they don't know what they can or cannot do differently.
Ugh, I, yes, 100%. I love performance review time. From an individual contributor perspective, it creates a sense of safety for an employee to be able to voice any concerns, but also look back and sometimes just say, I'm really proud of the work that I've done. Um, so, love that. And with that, this concludes our HR Talks with HM Pinnacle. And just remember, if you think you've had a bad day, in HR, every challenge is an opportunity for us to grow. So, thanks for spending time with Agent Pinnacle. Until next time, documentation.
Amen to that.